Welcome to the Friends of Dan Music Podcast. I'm Dan Miles. You've been listening to one of the most admired, most respected, and most commercially successful rock vocalists of all time. In 2013, he published his autobiography, Jukebox Hero, My 5 Decades in Rock and Roll. Joining me on the Skype from upstate New York to talk about his life, his book, and his awesome music is Lou Gramm. Welcome.
Hey, Dan, how goes it?
It goes good, and I probably should have said joining me from snowy upstate New York as I sit here in Chandler, Arizona with an expected high temperature of 92 degrees today.
I love it there, believe me.
Yeah, well, it's times like these that make you wonder when it's 92 in one state and snowing elsewhere. But hey, it's a big country.
You know what I wonder? I wonder, what am I doing here?
There's plenty of room for you out here, man.
All right.
Well, back in 1978, when I was living in Sacramento, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go see a concert with him in Lodi, California, which was about an 80-mile round trip prospect. So I asked him who the bands were. And first he said, Nick Gilder. And I said, oh, you mean the hot child in the city guy? And you're going to have to do better than that. And then next he said, Greg Kihn Band. I'm not driving to Lodi for that. Then he mentioned UFO, who I became a fan of later, but at the time I'd never heard of them. So that wasn't persuasive either. So finally he said, well, the main band, the headliner, is Foreigner. And I was like, dude, next time start with that and work your way down to Nick Gilder. So this was the Lodi Grape Festival, October 28, 1978. I know it's been a long time, but do you happen to remember that gig in Lodi?
I do. It's beautiful country out there, and I think it was right in a wine vineyard, wasn't it?
It was, and the interesting thing is when I went to do some research to try and get that date, obviously I didn't remember the exact date. I think that's the last big rock and roll show they've ever had there, was that show headlined by you guys. I mean, that's the way they speak about it. I mean, they did that, and it's been like barren ever since.
I wonder why they stopped having music there.
I guess you were just impossible to top, man.
Oh.
What I remember about that gig was being impressed by your level of commitment to your performance, because it was obvious that you were holding nothing back. You're laying it all out there.
The only way you can do it.
Well, you mentioned in your book that was your philosophy of performing. And when I read that, I remembered that show and how I'd witnessed that firsthand. So yeah, I'll vouch for that. Just as the Western calendar breaks down into AD and BC, I think we can break down your life into BF, DF, and AF, by which I mean before Foreigner, during Foreigner, and after Foreigner, because, your life didn't begin and end with your time in that band. You grew up in Rochester, New York, which is 300 miles north of New York City. Your father was a big band leader. Your mother was a big band singer. Your brothers are both talented musicians, and we all know where you ended up. So you had a musical family, to say the least. So why don't you tell us about Sauce Sundays?
Yeah. Sundays we would get up and head down the stairs, and the sauce would be cooking on the stove, and the whole house would smell like it. And although it was time for breakfast, I would be craving sauce. And the radio was blasting with big band music, Harry James, and we had a station in Rochester that played just big band music, and my dad had it cranking. That was his music. So we would have breakfast and then dip a little Italian bread in the sauce, just for a taste, and just kind of hang around and play and read and stuff, get in trouble, all to the sounds of the big band era.
Yeah, and with an Italian twist. I said the spaghetti sauce, a little Sinatra, a little Caruso, Italian hour.
That's right.
Italia, Italiano, right? And I like to read the people that we know real well, whether they're actors or musicians. It's always fun to read about their life, their roots before they quote unquote struck it big. And that, I liked reading that. It sounds so homey, so Italian, so familiar. It was cool. Yeah, it might surprise people to know that you initially weren't a vocalist. You started out as a drummer. And,
yes, I did.
And I love the story in your book. I really love the story about your first paying gig. This country band, their drummer broke his arm, and they wanted you to perform with them, but they didn't really seem to be concerned about rehearsal. They just wanted you to show up at the gig without any knowledge of their repertoire. And they're like, well, play this kind of beat. And then, you'd play it and the song would end. They go, play this kind of beat, I guess you pulled it off, but I think most of us would be very nervous about the idea of playing with a band for the very first time, in front of an audience. Did they know this was your first professional gig and that you were kind of green?
I don't think they knew it was my first professional gig, but they did know that I didn't know any of their songs. So while he would count the song in before he would do that, he'd kind of sing a little bit of it in my ear to let me know how the song went, and then we were flying by the seat of our pants, you know.
Do you remember about how many people were in the audience? I mean, was it like 20 people, 100 people, or?
Well, it's probably about 100, a little over 100, 100 quarter. And
Yeah.
they were hardcore country fans, you know. This was a little bar that was a country hotspot in Rochester. I acquitted myself pretty decently. I kind of looked to them for the endings, and funny enough, it was a drum beat that started all the songs.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty ballsy, man, because I think a lot of us have that dream. Musicians have that dream where you're in bed dreaming, and you dream you're on stage, you're with your band, there's a huge audience, they're ready to rock, and then you turn and to look at each other and realize none of you know the songs, or, oh, I
Or we
know
don't
this.
even know each other.
Exactly. That's crazy, man. I love those kind of stories. And, we're not going to cover obviously every single thing in your book, but I do want to hit some of my favorites. In fact, another of my favorites is the story in 1965. You're 15 years old. Your girlfriend gets tickets to see the Rolling Stones, and your parents forbid you to go, not necessarily because they're opposed to the music, but they're concerned for your safety because there've been full on riots on this Stones tour. Of course, you're the classic rebellious teenager, so you just go anyways, knowing you'll pay the price later. But as it turns out, they were kind of right because the crowd got so unruly with people jumping on stage and girls getting crushed. And the police chief stopped the show and sent everyone home early anyways. And you ended up getting grounded for a month. So was it worth it?
It was way worth it. I had the time of my life, and about 3:30 in the morning, I was trying to find a way to get home, and my friends, we all pitched in enough change in our pockets to get me almost home. I didn't say anything to the cab driver when he dropped me off. I had my hands together, and it was filled with change. And he looked at that and he says, "Get out of here." But I knew that I was gonna pay for that music, you know.
There's an awesome capper to that story because years later you're opening for the Rolling Stones and you call your dad, the guy who grounded you, and say, "Hey, just thought you ought to know I'm going to see the Stones again tonight."
I did thought he'd want to know, you know.
Well, fortunately, at that point, you guys could laugh about it. You weren't like a teenager anymore. But and we might have a couple more cameos by Lou's dogs. That's no problem. Yeah, but you explain in the book how you eventually transitioned from drumming to singing. And I will let everybody read that for themselves. But what I wonder is how your experience as a drummer informed your vocal style. Do you think you might have approached the rhythmic aspect of singing differently than if you hadn't been a drummer first?
I think so. Yeah, I think the point of playing drums and singing really put my vocals rhythmically right in the pocket, allowed me to sing slightly behind the beat, like a lot of soul singers sing. I guess they call that in the pocket.
Oh yeah.
I actually realized what was going on at the time that I started singing like that, and even when I stopped playing, carried that style into my vocal days.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear you say that, and that's interesting because there's certain singing drummers we think of every time, like Don Henley and Phil Collins. But just yesterday on Facebook, somebody posted "Grand Funk, We're American Band." I didn't realize the drummer sang that song. I guess I need to brush up on those guys. I was ready for the guitar player to start singing it, and
Right.
the drummer started singing, and oh wow, cool. And I think you're right, and I think that's something we can all listen for now, not just in your career, but just in general. That because your whole body is moving. You're kicking the drum, your snare, your hi-hat, and you got to sing. I guess it would be really hard not to sort of sing in the pocket, to get fancy and go outside of it. Because I would imagine your hands and feet might try and follow you.
Well, unless you don't play in the pocket, then it would be easy not to sing in the pocket.
Good point. Yeah. Well, of course, we covered your early days as a musician a little bit there, but eventually, you grew as a musician to the extent that your band Black Sheep scored a record deal. Another of my favorite stories in your book involves a recording session with Black Sheep in New York City where you bump into somebody who's recording in another studio, a friendly guy who's genuinely interested in you and your band. He even casually challenges you to shoot a game of pool. And who was that guy?
That guy was John Lennon.
Hello.
And that was a very interesting half hour, 45 minutes. I thought, in retrospect, I did pretty well to hold it together because I didn't know if I would be able to or not. He was one of my musical heroes, if not at the top of the list, and I didn't see that coming. When I walked into the break room, I was going there to take a break, not be put in the spot of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually was walking down the street in England one time and ran into George Martin. Same thing. Like there was no preparation. I just had to wing it. And then we parted and I thought, that was George Martin I was talking to.
Yeah.
But the way you tell the story, it sounds like he was like real friendly. He wasn't like aloof, or he's the kind of guy you hear all different stories from all different people about him. One of the ones you hear is he was very nice and very friendly, provided the person didn't just get all beatly and all
Yeah.
worshipy. If they just acted like a regular person, he was totally nice. Well, the thing we got to ask is, who won the pool game?
Well, he won the pool game. I got to say, I didn't give it away. I played to my best of my ability. I was not a great pool player, but I took him deep into the game before he won. So the conversation was not trite. He asked me which studio I was in, and was it an original band? What's the name of the band, and this and that. And just some making conversation, and that was enough for me. And then when the game was over, we put our sticks down. He says, "I got to get back," and I said, "See you later," and that was it.
You were in the studio recording, so he knew you had to be someone on the ball. You weren't just a guy off the street. And we're going to move on from Black Sheep, but people should go check out those albums you did. They're really good, and they sort of show your roots and sort of before and after, and where you were with your vocals and your writing. And I would sort of describe it as sort of like a Bad Company feel with a Deep Purple Hammond organ in there. It's kind of a nice combination of the two. Really nice stuff.
Thank you.
But even though Black Sheep had a ton of potential and was gaining momentum, you guys ran into some really bad luck that you couldn't recover from. And again, we'll let everybody read about that for themselves. It's a sad story, but there again, one door closes, one door opens, they say.
You got that right. You got that right.
Yeah, so once you became available, Mick Jones from Spooky Tooth invited you to New York City to audition for the new band that he was forming. Apparently, he'd run through like 50 different singers. Nobody was the right fit. Now you roll in, and about 20 seconds after you start singing, everybody knows you're the guy. Unfortunately, nobody thinks to tell you that. So, for the next few days, they're all under the assumption that you're the new singer, and you came down there without a change of clothes. You thought you were going to sing and turn around and go home. That seems a little awkward.
Yes, it was.
And they weren't pranking you. They're just like, you're thinking, well, am I in the band or not? And they just
are they breaking them on me? What's the story? Am I in? That's what I asked Mick. I said, I'm completely out of clothes. I says, just tell me, am I in? And they all looked at each other and they went, of course you're in.
Yeah. These miscommunications happened because it wasn't like, of course, from your point of view, because you did. I guess the problem is you didn't hear the other 50 guys.
Yeah, and I think it's a British thing, actually, the way they were holding back. I'm telling me.
Yeah, they might have been, because they had to notice you're wearing the same clothes every day for 3 or 4 days. Yeah, well, let's clarify that at that point, the band was Mick Jones on guitar, Al Greenwood on keyboards, Ian McDonald on multiple instruments, and then after you joined as the vocalist, you guys dialed in the rhythm section, Dennis Elliott on drums, and Ed Gagliardi on bass. And then, in recognition of something you just mentioned, half the band was British, half the band was American, and meant no matter where you played, half of you would always be foreigners. You decided to call yourself Foreigner. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, we were all trying to come up with names, and Mick first came up with Trigger.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking trigger of a gun. I'm thinking trigger, and then I'm thinking, oh yeah, Roy Rogers' horse.
Yeah, that's the thing about 3 British and 3 Americans, that cultural thing. But if you'd been called yourselves Trigger, you could have called your first album could have been called Happy. Then the artist would have been Trigger Happy, but
Trigger Happy, or Hair.
Yeah, there you go, man.
Hair Trigger.
Fortunately, didn't work out that way. The impression I got was that the other 5 people shot it down pretty quick. We're not going to be called Trigger. So with the help of John Kolodner, with the advice of John Kolodner, you guys got signed to Atlantic Records. And, I was living in Queens when your debut album came out, and I very clearly remember the buzz that it generated, which was similar to the first Boston album in the sense that, you guys didn't sound like a quote unquote new band, trying to find themselves. Like right out of the gate, you sounded fully realized, like a hit band that knew exactly what they were doing, and Atlantic started to release singles from the album. which became huge hits. But meanwhile, you guys had never played a single live gig together. Usually you got to hit the road and build up a following slowly over time. But right from the start, you guys were playing to audiences already familiar with your material, which seems like a positive development for the band. But do you think there was any downside to that sort of instantaneous success?
Well, only that I think that when we played our first few shows, we had no idea what we really sounded like, and there wasn't that comfort level of playing with the other people in your band. It was, well, we're doing a show. Who is this guy? You know?
Yeah, I got to imagine it came together pretty fast, though, because you guys were all experienced musicians apart from each other.
That's true. That I think that saved us.
Yeah, and then you come together and you go, well, we made that great album. You look at each other. You're right. You don't know what. In fact, I just watched that documentary about that guy, Filipino guy who got the job in Journey. And
Right.
the very first time he performed, he just ran all over the place like it was the Olympics, like a wild man, because nobody had told him what he was and wasn't supposed to do. And he was so damn excited, and they kept waiting for him to be out of breath from all that running. But I guess he kept it together. It was adrenaline. And they told him afterwards, they go, what the hell was that? The manager's like, what the hell was that? And he didn't really know what he was supposed to do. And that was kind of on them, honestly. I don't think it was on. They knew he could sing, but nobody really told him what was and wasn't appropriate. He just kept running from one side to the other.
But I saw him about a year ago,
Yeah.
and he was still doing that. It was toned down a little bit, but
Yeah.
that's kind of his style.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point too, because as it went on, he never really did the Jim Morrison close your eyes and stand there and hold the microphone thing. He's
Right.
he's always doing something.